Well, as Eric pointed out, we're not done. I think that's a good segue actually into telling you about an organization that some of you know that I've been getting involved in. It's an organization called Better Angels. Now, if you don't know about it, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. So Better Angels is I like how they call it a citizens organization, which is to say they don't use the words grassroots, but it is a grassroots organization uniting red and blue, that is liberal and conservatives, in a working alliance to depolarize the United States. So what they do is they try to understand the other person's point of view, even if we don't agree with it. And we engage with those we disagree with, looking for common ground and ways to work together. And we support the principles that bring us together rather than that divide us. So this is kind of what Better Angels is about. And with all of the polarization that is going out there in the world, I'm trying to figure out how do we stop this, because we feel like we're heading into two different countries. I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. And in fact, the word Better Angels, you might think that, oh, that means that it's a religious organization, and it's not at all. It comes from a famous quote by Abraham Lincoln, which was given in his first inaugural address. So Abraham Lincoln is facing an incredibly polarized world, right? He's heading into civil war. Some states have already left the Union at this point. And so he said this. He said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." The better angels of our nature. This is what this organization is trying to do. It's trying to appeal to the better angels of our nature. But it seems like in politics these days that better angels of our nature have kind of flown the coop. Because this is kind of what's happened in our country. So this is back in 1994. So this was basically, they took 10 different issues, and they said, where do you stand on them? And they found that there's actually a fair bit of crossover in a lot of the different issues. This is back in 1994. This is where we are in 2017. And that's even 2 years ago. We are becoming so polarized that we can't even hear. The part down below is where there's crossover. If you look at, that's where it was. This is where we could hear people, hear one another, and this is where it is now. It's fascinating to think about this polarization, because I believe, what I've come to believe at any rate, is that both sides really love their country. They both want it to be healthy and whole. They both want a robust economy, jobs for everyone. Believe it or not, they all want a clean environment. They may not agree on global warming, but they want a clean environment. And freedom. The problem is that we don't trust that this is true. We don't trust that the other side has any type of good intentions, or that they are good even in general. This is sort of the polarization that happens. So we tend to think the other side is either stupid, right, they're fools, they're ignorant and should know better, or outright evil. And just about any marriage counselor will tell you about any type of relationship that where you start heading into disdain, which is heading over there, right? That's pretty much the end of the marriage. It's really hard to come back from that. It takes a lot to repair that kind of damage. And this isn't to say that there aren't certain individuals who might fall truly into one of those categories. But the vast majority are none of the above. They're not fools, they're not evil, and they're not, to be pitied and ignorant. Although I would say there are some, but that's good. Looking at the vast majority, I would say not. So when the Better Angels, when they put together these workshops, and I've been trained as a moderator, as some of you know, in this Better Angels. I just did my first workshop recently. And when they put this together, this is what they're up against, right? Is the other side thinking, each side thinking the other one is either a fool, they're evil, they're just stupid. So it's kind of interesting that the very first exercise that we do in the Better Angels workshop is around creating trust. And you might think that this would be kind of impossible, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So here's how they do it. They take the two groups, so they take reds and blues, and they put them in separate rooms, and they say to each group, come up with a list of 4 to 5 of the stereotypes that you know is it about your own type. So blues, what are the stereotypes you know that's said about you? And reds, what are the stereotypes that's said about you, right? So that's pretty easy, actually. You'll be amazed at how well people actually know what their own stereotypes are. Then they get to say why that stereotype is wrong, okay? Again, pretty straightforward, so they're starting to get into it in each of their individual groups, they're starting to get into it. And then the third thing that they have to do is they have to say, you know, stereotypes don't come out of nowhere. Where's the kernel of truth in that stereotype? What's that kernel of truth that makes you kind of squirm? Like, well, okay, yeah, maybe. That wants to make you go to that edge of doubt and look out at the light. And when this is done, they come back together and they represent to one another. They have to present the stereotypes, why they're wrong, but then also present the kernel of truth. So I'll give you an example. One of the kernels of truth, or one of the stereotypes that the blues said about ourselves, about what all blues said was, well, we know that we're sometimes stereotyped as not patriotic or loyal. Okay. What's not true about that? We're actually very patriotic. We're just willing to speak truth to power. Which, by the way, a red came up to me afterwards and goes, I could totally see that now. Like they had never thought about it that way. But the kernel of truth is that sometimes we do sort of block freedom of speech. We can do things like burn flags, which for many people means unpatriotic, right? So on the red side, one of the ones I was impressed that they put up there was they said, we know that we're characterized as racist. And they're saying what it wasn't true is that, you know, many minorities vote conservative. It's not for them about race. But the kernel of truth that they admitted to, yeah, the alt-right can be. And some of our leaders are. And they admitted it straight out. What was really interesting that there was this sense of trust that was then created that we could move forward in the workshop. And I had literally a red come to me later. It was in a group when I was moderating the reds, and they said, I can't believe those blues admitted some of those things. That was really honest. They were surprised at the honesty. I talked to the moderator, and he said, you know, the blues said the same thing. When people are willing to be open and honest, then trust is built. Maybe only when people are willing to be open and honest, then trust is built. And then you can begin a better dialogue. You know, last week we were here, we were talking about the need to rehumanize people, right? To get away from labels, and we were talking about just mercy and the people on death row wrongly convicted. And one of the ways that we do this to rehumanize people is building trust. When we trust that someone is coming to the table with an open mind and open heart and hears us, we're more apt to listen ourselves, to dive into the complexity of the situation. We're less likely to get reactive and want to lash out in sound bites. You know, I know that we Unitarian Universalists, we consider ourselves very open-minded, and for the most part, I think that we really are. And in fact, we say that we're the church of the open mind, the loving heart, and the reaching hands, which I think is a lovely way of saying that. But I'm willing to bet that in this congregation, most of us here are better able to see a convict as a fully formed human being than someone of the opposite political persuasion. And you wouldn't be alone, right? In the last 10 years, the polarization of this country is off the charts. It's not just you, it's all of us. So I want to talk just a minute about what does it mean to be open-minded. So, to me, open-minded, it doesn't mean that you're going to have your mind changed. So what it means to me is it's acceptance of one another's. I'm open to their being who they are, and I'm not going to go around judging that. And that's really our second principle, right? We have 7 principles as Unitarian Universalists. Actually, I'm sorry, that's the third principle. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. Sorry, third principle. The second thing is that there's then a willingness to hear other ideas, though we may still disagree. It's not about changing your mind. It's a willingness to simply hear them. And as I keep saying, it's not about changing your mind. That's one of the things that I like about Better Angels, because they state right out, no one here is going to change their mind. We're not here to do this. This is not just someone like, hallelujah, I've seen the light, and now I've converted to the other side. No, that is not what it's about at all. The other thing that I think is interesting, Bertrand Russell, the philosopher and pacifist, said that an open mind is the prerequisite for critical thinking. It's what gets you to go, okay, is that right? Is that wrong? What's going on here? Now, the exercise that we did for the meditation today, I'm just curious, first of all, it's always an invitation, so how many of you actually did the exercise for the meditation? Okay, majority of you, thank you. So, did you find a phrase, a word, something that kind of resonated with you, something like that, right? Did you have some maybe, just a little bit of a revelation of like, oh, I wonder why that's resonating with me in my life right now. What's that word, that phrase, that thing that happened? Anybody here have that experience? A little bit, I'm seeing some nodding heads. Okay. The reason that worked is because you came to it with an open mind. You didn't really know what to expect. Hopefully you sort of basically trust me. I'm not going to lead you down some weird path, you know. You trust this safe space. So your mind is open. So to me, that's the other part about having an open mind, is having trust. Taking a little bit of a risk to say, oh, okay, I'll try this thing. Even though it's not my thing, I'm going to try it, right? Now our meditation day was kind of an easy one, right? Because it's really hard to have an open mind. When you're talking to someone where you feel you're attacked, even your person is attacked, your values are attacked, we get triggered by what the other side says, and our mind no longer is open, it's closed, it shuts down. So for example, one of the things that immediately I could feel my body just start clenching is when people start talking from the other side, talking about marriage equality, right? My body just sort of goes, okay. It goes into overdrive, thinking about counter arguments, and then of course, right, I go to that place of disdain. They just knew. They're just being stupid. I want to give you an example that was kind of interesting to me. There's, I'm one of the co-presidents of the Interfaith Council, and a couple years ago I was working with one of the people on the Interfaith Council, and she's Mormon. She's from the Mormon church. I went over to her house to help her out with something, and she brought up this idea. I think at that time marriage equality had just happened. And she said something along the lines of, well, I know your church is really for it, and, I'm Mormon, we don't. And I could just feel my stomach like, I don't want to go there with her. Because I know this woman, she's like incredibly dedicated. She's a widow, she's been struggling with trying to deal with her own grief, but she's extremely dedicated to her church and incredibly helpful on the Interfaith Council. Like, she's the one who's always there, ready to help, and never has a mean word for anyone. When she brought this up, it's just, my back goes up. I'm like, is she going to try to convince me otherwise, seriously? But instead, I went to kind of my better angel self. I was like, okay, calming down. And I remember as she was saying something, I can't remember exactly what she was saying, something about, I know your church does, and she looked kind of apologetic, kind of like, and I said, it must be hard for you, someone who is so dedicated to your faith, to see marriage equality happen. And I remember she just kind of was like this relief. And she was like, yeah, it really is hard. There was this little bit of trust that was built. I wasn't going to hammer at her and acknowledge her pain, her truth. But I remember one of the things that I also said to her was, the thing is, for me, when we deny someone the right to be publicly love another person, to me God is love, and so it's like denying them love. And she was like, oh. So, well, maybe someday my church will be okay with marriage equality. I didn't say a word. But that's how you crack open to a new possibility. You acknowledge one another's feelings. How do we get to that place of our better angels? I think it's really hard. The better angels of our nature. I think the first thing you can do is just acknowledging the humanity of the other person. And if you can't, find something you can agree on. something you both love. Cheese, I don't know, whatever. And this isn't, by the way, for the person who's screaming at you on the street, right? That's, you can have compassion for that and go, I'm sorry they have so much hatred in their mind, but okay, whatever. This is for that family member that you're just like, okay. The other thing is that what I have found is notice the feelings that are coming up, not the facts. Have you noticed that when someone tries to tell you facts, right, about something, what they're basically telling you is, I don't trust you to think for yourself. And so they break down that trust. So instead, go to feelings and stories. Like I remember one woman in the Better Angels, it was another workshop, and she said, when I married my wife, we went to, go on our honeymoon, and the hotel wouldn't serve us where we wanted to go. And it was just so devastating to us. And I'm like, now that people can relate to that feeling, that story. So acknowledging also then their point of view. So if you notice their feelings, say, yeah, that must have been really hard. Reflect it back to them, their feelings. Focus on feelings, not facts. And then, state your views. You don't have to hold back. But speak in your I statements with your own feelings. It's like denying them God. I knew that was a word that she would understand. And here's the thing, it's really uncomfortable to feel sympathy or empathy to people that you really want to hate, right? It is. That's because it's really easy to hate. It's really hard to love. Love asks something of us. Hate does not. The thing to remember also is trust yourself. Right? Trust that your values are right and that they're not going to disappear if you hear someone say something that you don't like. Right? Trust your own calling in this world. I think of Annie Margaret Barr in our children's story today, right? She lived in a world of incredible polarization. Women have this role, men have this role. She was told she couldn't go to this remote area of the Khasi Hills in India. And of course, it would be tough. She knew the kernel of truth. She wasn't blind to it, and it was. It was. She had to walk 20 miles just to teach one class. It was crazy. But it was the right thing for her to do, and she didn't change her mind. Trust what you are called and how you are called to be in this world, and stand in that truth. I do believe that the vast majority of both sides love this country, and they want it to be healthy and whole. And the vast majority of both sides aren't listening to one another. You know, this month, our song of the month is I Am Open and I Am Willing by Holly Near. And every time I see these words, there is hurting in our families, there is sorrow in our towns, there's panic in the nation, there's wailing the whole world around. It really just hits me. Our nation, it's just hurting so badly. And a lot of it has to do with that disdain, that hatred. We have to be open to that light of change. Not changing our ideas or our ideals, but changing the way we see others, changing the way we approach the problems. And I believe that we as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to a very special role in this world. Not just as a religion, but as a people who know to have open minds, who know how to see the better angels in ourselves and in others. We are called to help heal a fractured world. And our great gift is our diversity of belief. That can help us get there, but only if we create those bridges of trust. If we can create a church where atheists sit next to Christians and pagans sit next to agnostics, we all pretty much love humanism for the most part. And we've got our 7 principles that bind us. I mean, that's nothing short of amazing. And it's hard work. I mean, people sometimes don't like it if I mention God. And some people are like, why don't you mention God more often? This is really hard work. But I believe it's the work that we're called to do. We aren't given an easy task because we don't have a lot of rules, we don't have creeds, we don't have dogmas. None of that to light our way. Instead, what we're given is tools of open minds, loving hearts, and reaching hands. We move forward figuring out as we go because we're creating a new way of being in the world, and it's the way, I believe, that we're going to save the world. So let us listen to the Spirit. Listen to the better angels of our natures, and let us save this beautiful, wonderful world. Blessed be, and amen.
Please stand as you're comfortable.